Welcome back. I am Pemberton, and this is part 4 to one of Herodotus's Histories. The fleets come together off Artemisium, and then a tremendous storm, a 3-day northeaster, falls on the Persian ships where they lie on an open coast, and dashes hundreds of them to pieces on the rocks of Magnesia. The Greeks, snug in harbour, give thanks to Poseidon. On land the two armies sit facing each other across the narrow pass, and Xerxes, disbelieving, sends a scout who comes back to report that the Spartans are stripped for exercise and calmly combing their long hair. Narration tells him what it means these men are preparing to die. Let us continue.
The Delphians, according to the oracle, still make propitiatory offerings to the winds even to this day. Meanwhile, the fleet of Xerxes set out from the city of Therma. 10 of its ships, those that sailed best, crossed straight towards Sciathos, where 3 Hellenic ships were keeping watch in advance, 1 Troezenian, 1 Aeginetan, and 1 Athenian. When the crews of these ships caught sight of the ships of the barbarians, they set off to escape. The ship of Troezen, commanded by Praxinos, was pursued and captured at once by the barbarians. They then took the man among the fighting men on board who was most distinguished for beauty and cut his throat at the prow of the ship, making for themselves a good omen from the first Hellene they had captured, one preeminent in beauty. The name of the man sacrificed was Leon, and perhaps he also had his name to thank in some measure for what happened to him. The ship of Aegina, however, whose master was Asinides, even gave them some trouble to capture, because Pythias, son of Iscanus, served on board as a fighting man and proved himself a most valiant man that day. When the ship was being taken, he held out fighting until he was hacked all to pieces. When he fell he did not die, but still had breath in him, and the Persians serving as fighting men on the ships, because of his valor, took every care to save his life. They applied ointments of myrrh to heal his wounds and wrapped him in bands of the finest linen. When they came back to their own main body, they showed him to the whole army, marveling at him and treating him well, but the rest whom they had captured in this ship they treated as slaves. 2 of the 3 ships were captured in this way. The third, whose master was Formos, an Athenian, ran ashore in its flight at the mouth of the river Penaios. The barbarians took possession of the vessel, but not of the crew, for as soon as the Athenians had run the ship ashore, they leapt out of it, passed through Thessaly, and made their way to Athens. The Hellenes stationed at Artemisium were informed of these things by fire signals from Sciathos. When they learned of them and were struck with fear, they moved their anchorage from Artemisium to Chalkis, intending to guard the Euripos, while at the same time leaving day watchers on the heights of Euboea. Of the 10 ships of the barbarians, 3 sailed up to the reef called Myrmex, which lies between Sciathos and Magnesia. When the barbarians had erected there a stone pillar, which they had brought to the reef for that purpose, they set out with their main body from Therma, the difficulties of the passage having now been cleared away. They sailed there with all their ships, having allowed 11 days to pass since the king had set out on his march from Therma. They were informed of this reef, lying exactly in the middle of the fairway, by Pammon of Skyros. Sailing throughout the day, the barbarians completed the voyage to Sepias in Magnesia and to the sea beach that lies between the city of Costanea and the headland of Sepias. As far as this place, and as far as Thermopylae, the army had been free from disaster, and its number was still, as I find by calculation, this, of the ships that came from Asia, which numbered 1,207. The original number of crews supplied by the several nations was, I find, 24 myriads plus 1,400, if one reckons 200 men to each ship. On board each of these ships, there also served as fighting men, besides the fighting men belonging to its own nation in each case, 30 men who were Persians, Medes, or Saccans. This adds 3 myriads 6,210 to the others. I will also add to this, and to the earlier number the crews of the 50-oared galleys, assuming that there were about 80 men, more or less, in each one. Of these vessels there were, as was said before, 3,000 assembled. It follows, therefore, that there were in them 24 myriads of men. This was the naval force that came from Asia, amounting in all to 51 myriads and 7,610 besides. Then the foot soldiers had been found to number 170 myriads, and the horsemen 8 myriads. I will also add to these the Arabian camel drivers and the Libyan chariot drivers, assuming them to amount to 20,000 men. The result is that the number of the ship's crews combined with that of the land army amounts to 231 myriads and 7,610 besides. This is the account of the army brought up out of Asia itself, not counting the attendants who accompanied it, or the grain transports and the men who sailed in them. There still remains to be counted, in addition to all that has been summed up, the force that was being led from Europe, and of this we must give a probable estimate. The Hellenes of Thrace and of the islands lying off the Thracian coast supplied 120 ships. From these ships comes a total of 24,000 men. As for the land force supplied by the Thracians, Paeonians, Aerdians, Bactrians, the race that inhabits Troglodyte, the Brygians, Pyrians, Macedonians, Parabians, Aenians, Dolopians, Magnesians, Achaeans, and all those who live in the coast region of Thrace, I estimate that these various nations supplied 30 myriads. These myriads, then, added to those from Asia, make a total of 264 myriads of fighting men, plus 1,610. Such being the number of the fighting body, I suppose that the attendants who went with them, and the men in the small vessels that carried grain, and again in the other vessels that sailed with the army, were not fewer but more numerous than the fighting men. I assume them equal in number, neither more nor less, and so, being supposed equal in number to the fighting body, they make up the same number of myriads. Thus 528 myriads 3,220 was the number of men whom Xerxes, son of Darius, led as far as Sapias and Thermopylae. This is the number of the whole army of Xerxes. But no man can state any exact number of the women who baked bread for it, the concubines, or the eunuchs, nor, because of their multitude, could anyone state the number of draught animals and other beasts of burden, or the Indian hounds that accompanied it. So it does not occur to me to wonder that the streams of some rivers failed them. Rather, I wonder how the provisions were sufficient to feed so many myriads. For I find by calculation that, if each man received 1 quart of wheat every day and nothing more, there would be spent every day 11 myriads and 340 metamnoi, and in this I am not counting anything for the women, eunuchs, baggage animals, or dogs. Of all these men, amounting to so many myriads, not one was more worthy than Xerxes himself in beauty and stature, to possess this power. The fleet then set out and sailed. When it put into land in the region of Magnesia, at the beach between the city of Costenia and the headland of Sapias, the first ships to arrive lay moored by the land, and the others rode at anchor behind them. Since the beach was not large, they lay at anchor with their prows projecting toward the sea in an arrangement 8 ships deep. For that night they lay in this way. But at early dawn, after clear sky and windless calm, the sea began to be violently disturbed, and a great storm fell on them with a strong east wind, the wind that those who live around those parts call Hellespontius. As many of them as perceived the wind rising, and were moored in such a way that they could do it, drew their ships up on land before the storm came, and both they and their ships escaped. But those ships the storm caught out at sea it cast away, some at the place called Epnoi and Pelion, and others on the beach. Some were wrecked on the headland of Sepias itself, others at the city of Meliboea, and others were thrown ashore at Costenia. The violence of the storm could not be resisted. There is a story reported that the Athenians had called on Boreas to aid them because of an oracle, for another utterance of the god had come to them bidding them call on their brother by marriage to be their helper. According to the story of the Hellenes, Boreas has an Attic wife, Oreithuia, daughter of Erechtheus. Because of this connection, the Athenians, according to the tale that has spread abroad, guessed that their brother by marriage was Boreas. When they perceived the wind rising, as they lay with their ships at Chalkis and Euboea, or even before that, they offered sacrifices and called on Boreas and Oreithuia to assist them and to destroy the ships of the barbarians, as they had done before around Mount Athos. Whether it was for this reason that the wind Boreas fell upon the barbarians while they lay at anchor, I cannot say. In any case, the Athenians report that Boreas had come to their help in former times, and that at this time he accomplished for them the things of which I speak. When they returned home, they set up a temple dedicated to Boreas by the river Ilissus. In this disaster, according to those who give the lowest number, not fewer than 400 ships were lost, together with innumerable men and an immense quantity of valuables. The shipwreck proved very profitable to Amenocles, son of Cretans, a Magnesian who held lands about Sepias. He picked up many gold cups that were afterward thrown up on the shore, and many silver ones also. He found treasure chests that had belonged to the Persians and acquired more gold objects than can be described. Yet although this man became very wealthy from the things he found, in other respects he was not fortunate, for he too suffered misfortune, being troubled by the killing of a child. No account was made of the grain transports and other vessels that perished there. So great was the loss that the commanders of the fleet, struck with fear that the Thessalians might attack them now that they had been brought into an evil plight, built a high palisade around their camp from the fragments of the wrecks. The storm continued for 3 days. At last the Magians, sacrificing victims and singing incantations to appease the wind by enchantments, and in addition offering sacrifice to Thetis and the Nereids, caused it to cease on the 4th day, or else, for some other reason, it abated of its own accord. They offered sacrifice to Thetis because the Ionians had told them the story that she had been carried off from that place by Peleus, and that the whole headland of Sepias belonged to her and to the other Nereids. The storm, then, had ceased on the 4th day. Meanwhile, on the day after the first storm began, the day, watchers had run down from the heights of Euboea and were informing the Hellenes of everything that had happened concerning the shipwreck. When the Hellenes learned of it, they first prayed to Poseidon the Saviour and poured libations, and then they hastened to go back to Artemisium, expecting that only a very few enemy ships would be left to come against them. So they came for the 2nd time and lay with their ships around Artemisium. From that time, even to the present, they preserved the use of the surname Saviour for Poseidon. Meanwhile, the barbarians, when the wind had ceased and the swell of the sea had calmed, drew their ships into the sea and sailed along the shore of the mainland. Having rounded the extremity of Magnesia, they sailed straight into the gulf that leads toward Pagasai. In this gulf of Magnesia, there is a place where Heracles is said to have been left behind by Jason and his comrades, after being sent from the Argo to fetch water, at the time when they were sailing for the fleece to Aea in the land of Colchis. From that place, after taking in water, they intended to launch their ship into the open sea, and from this the place came to have the name of Phetai. Here then the fleet of Xerxes took up its moorings. It happened that 15 of these ships put out to sea much later than the rest, and they caught sight of the ships of the Hellenes at Artemisium. The barbarians supposed these ships to be their own, and so they sailed toward them and fell among the enemy. Their commander was Sandox, son of Themisios, governor of Chium in Iolia. Before this time King Darius had taken the Sandox, who was one of the royal judges, and crucified him because Sandox had given an unjust judgment for money. After he had been hung up, Darius counted up the matter and found that Sandox had done more good services to the royal house than there were offences to match them. Finding this, and perceiving that he himself had acted with more haste than wisdom, Darius let him go. Thus Sandox escaped from King Darius and did not perish, but survived. Now, however, when he sailed in toward the Hellenes, he was destined not to escape a second time. When the Hellenes saw them sailing up and understood the mistake being made, they put out against them, and captured them without difficulty. In one of these ships Herodotus was captured, the despot of Alabanda in Caria. In another was captured the Paphian commander Penthelos, son of Demeneus, who had brought 12 ships from Paphos, lost 11 of them in the storm that came on by Sepias, and was now captured sailing toward Artemisium with the one that had escaped. After inquiring from these men what they wished to learn about the army of Xerxes, the Hellenes sent them away in bonds to the Isthmus of the Corinthians. The fleet of the barbarians, except for the 15 ships I said were commanded by Sandox, had arrived at Aphetai. Meanwhile Xerxes with the land army, having marched through Thessalia and Achaia, had already entered the land of the Melians 2 days earlier. In Thessaly he had held a contest for his own horses, also testing the Thessalian cavalry, because he had been informed that it was the best of all among the Hellenes, and in this test the horses of Hellas were far surpassed by the others. Of the rivers in Thessalia, only the Anachonos failed to provide enough water for the army to drink. Of the rivers that flow in Achaia, even the largest of them, the Epidanos, barely held out. When Xerxes reached Delos of Achaia, the guides who informed him of the way, wishing to tell him everything fully, reported to him a local legend, the matters connected with the temple of Zeus Laphystius. They told how Athamas, son of Aeolos, had plotted death for Phrixus after taking counsel with Ino, and how afterward, by command of an oracle, the Achaeans imposed the following tasks on his descendants. Whoever is the eldest of this race is placed under an injunction forbidding him to enter the city hall, and the Achaeans themselves keep watch. The city hall is called by the Achaeans the hall of the people. If he enters it, he may not come out until he is about to be sacrificed. They also added that many of those who were about to be sacrificed had before now run away and gone to another land because they were afraid, and if afterward, in the course of time, they returned to their own land and were caught, they were placed in the city hall. They told how the man is sacrificed, thickly covered all over with wreaths, and with what form of procession he is brought out to the sacrifice. This is done to the descendants of Kaidasoros, son of Phrixus, because when the Achaeans, in obedience to an oracle, were making Athamas, son of Aeolos, a victim to purge the sins of the land, and were just about to sacrifice him, Kaidasoros came from Aea of the Colchians and rescued him. By doing this he brought the wrath of the gods upon his own descendants. When Xerxes heard these things, he came to the sacred grove, but both abstained from entering it himself and commanded his whole army to do likewise. He also paid reverence both to the house and to the sacred enclosure of the descendants of Athamas. These are the things that happened in Thessalia and Achaia. From these regions Xerxes proceeded to the Malian land, going along beside a gulf of the sea in which there is an ebb and flow of the tide every day. Around this gulf there is a level space, broad in some parts but very narrow in others, and lofty inaccessible mountains surround this place, enclosing the whole land of Males, and are called the rocks of Trachis. The first city on this gulf as one goes from Achaia's Antikyra, by which the river Spercheios, flowing from the land of the Enianians, runs out into the sea. About 20 furlongs from this river is another, named Dirus. It is said to have appeared in order to bring help to Heracles when he was burning. Again, 20 furlongs from this, there is another river called Melas. From this river Melas the city of Trachis is 5 furlongs distant. Here, in the parts where Trachis is situated, is the widest part of all this district, as regards the space from the mountains to the sea. The plain has an extent of 22,000 plethra. In the mountain range that encloses the land of Trachis, there is a cleft to the south of Trachis itself. Through this cleft the river Asopos flows, running along the foot of the mountain. There is also another river called Phoenix, south of the Asopos, not large, which flows from these mountains and runs out into the Asopos. At the river Phoenix is the narrowest place, for here a road has been constructed with only a single wheel track. From the river Phoenix it is 15 furlongs to Thermopylae. In the space between the river Phoenix and Thermopylae, there is a village called Anthela, by which the river Asopos flows and so runs out into the sea. Around this village there is a wide space where a temple dedicated to Demeter of the Amphictyons is set up, and there are seats for the Amphictyonic counselors and a temple dedicated to Amphictyon himself. King Xerxes was encamped within the region of Trachis in the land of the Malians, and the Hellenes were encamped within the pass. This place is called Thermopylae by the Hellenes in general, but by the natives of the place, and those who live around it, it is called Pylae. Both sides, then, were encamped in this area. One side held command of all that lies beyond Trachis toward the north wind, while the others held what tends toward the south wind and midday on this side of the continent. These were the Hellenes who awaited the attack of the Persian in this place. From the Spartans, 300 hoplites. From the men of Tegea and Mantinea, 1,000, half from each place. From Orchomenos and Arcadia, 120. From the rest of Arcadia, 1,000. So many came from the Arcadians. From Corinth came 400, from Phlius 200, and from Mycene 80. These were the men who came from the Peloponnese. From the Boeotians came 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans. In addition to these, the Locrians of Opus had been summoned to come in their full force, and 1,000 Phocians had also been summoned. The Hellenes themselves had sent a summons to them by messengers, saying that they had come as forerunners of the others, that the rest of the allies were to be expected every day, that their sea was safely guarded, being watched by the Athenians, the Aeginetans, and those appointed to serve in the fleet, and that they needed to fear nothing. The one coming to attack Hellas, they said, was not a god but a man, and there was no mortal, nor would there ever be one, into whose fortunes evil had not been mingled from his very birth, with the greatest evils falling upon the greatest men. Therefore he too who was marching against them, being mortal, would be destined to fall short of his expectation. Hearing this, the Locrians and Phocians came to the assistance of the others at Trachis. Although these troops had other commanders according to the state to which each belonged, the man most held in regard and leader of the whole army was the Lacedaemonian Leonidas, son of Anaxandrides, son of Leon, son of Eurycratides, son of Anaxander, son of Eurycrates, son of Polydoros, son of Alcamenes, son of Teleclos, son of Archelaus, son of Hedesilaus, son of Dorissos, son of Leobotes, son of Echestratos, son of Auges, son of Eurysthenes, son of Aristodemos, son of Aristomachos, son of Cleodeos, son of Hilos, son of Heracles. He had obtained the kingship of Sparta contrary to expectation. Since he had 2 brothers older than himself, Cleomenes and Dorios, he had been far removed from any thought of becoming king. But Cleomenes died without a male child, and Dorios was no longer alive, having also ended his life in Sicily. Thus the kingdom came to Leonidas, both because he was older than Cleombrotus, for Cleombrotus was the youngest of the sons of Anaxandrides, and because he had married the daughter of Cleomenes. This time he went to Thermopylae, having chosen the 300 men appointed by law, men who happened to have sons. Before arriving, he also took with him those Thebans whom I mentioned when reckoning the number of the troops. Their commander was Leontiades, son of Eurymachus. The reason Leonidas was especially eager to take these men with him from among all the Hellenes was that strong accusations had been brought against them that they were taking the side of the Medes. Therefore he summoned them to the war, wishing to know whether they would send troops with the others, or openly renounce the alliance of the Hellenes. They sent men, though all the while they had other thoughts in mind. The Spartans had sent these men with Leonidas first, so that, seeing them, the other allies might join the campaign, and also because they feared that those allies too might take the side of the Medes if they heard that the Spartans were delaying action. Later, however, after they had kept the festival, for the festival of the Carnae stood in their way, they intended to leave a garrison in Sparta and come in full force quickly to help. The rest of the allies had intended to do the same themselves, for it happened that the Olympic festival fell at the same time as these events. Accordingly, since they did not suppose that the fighting at Thermopylae would be decided so soon, they sent only the forerunners of their force. This, then, was what they had intended to do. Meanwhile, the Hellenes at Thermopylae, when the Persian had come near the pass, were afraid and deliberated about retreating from their position. The rest of the Peloponnesians thought it best to go to the Peloponnese and guard the isthmus. But Leonidas, when the Phocians and Locrians were indignant at this opinion, voted to remain there and at the same time send messengers to the several states, telling them to come up to help, since they were too few to repel the army of the Medes. As they were deliberating in this way, Xerxes sent a scout on horseback to see how many they were and what they were doing. While he was still in Thessaly, he had heard that a small force had been assembled in this place, and that its leaders were Lacedaemonians together with Leonidas, who was of the race of Heracles. When the horsemen rode up toward their camp, he looked at them, but did not see the whole army, for it was not possible to see those posted inside the wall, which they had repaired and were guarding. He observed only those outside, whose station was in front of the wall, and it happened at that time that the Lacedaemonians were the ones posted outside. He saw some of the men practicing athletic exercises and others combing their long hair. As he looked on these things he marveled, and at the same time he observed their number. When he had observed everything exactly, he rode back unmolested, for no one attempted to pursue him, and he found himself treated with great indifference. When he returned, he reported to Xerxes everything he had seen. When Xerxes heard this report, he was not able to guess the truth of the matter, that the Lacedaemonians were preparing themselves to die and to deal death to the enemy as far as they could. Instead, it seemed to him that they were merely acting in a ridiculous way. Therefore he sent for Demaratos, son of Ariston, who was in his camp. When Demaratos came, Xerxes asked him about each of these things, wanting to discover what the Lacedaemonians were doing. Demaratos spoke to him as follows. You heard from my mouth at an earlier time, when we were setting out to go against Hellas, the things concerning these men. After hearing them, you made me an object of laughter, because I told you of the things that I perceived would come to pass. For to me, O king, the greatest of all aims is always to speak the truth before you. Hear me now also. These men have come to fight us for the passage, and this is what they are preparing to do. They have a custom as follows. Whenever they are about to put their lives in danger, they then attend to the arrangement of their hair. Be assured, however, that if you subdue these men and the rest of those who remain behind in Sparta, there is no other race of men that will await your onset, O king, or raise hands against you. For now you are about to fight against the noblest kingdom and city among the Hellenes, and against the best men. What Herodotus had seemed utterly incredible to Xerxes, and he asked a second time how men so few in number would fight with his host. Herodotus answered him, O king, treat me as a liar if you do not find that these things come to pass as I say. By saying this, he did not convince Xerxes. Xerxes let 4 days pass, always expecting that the Hellenes would take to flight. But on the 5th day, when they did not depart, but remained there, seeming to him to persist in shamelessness and folly, he became enraged and sent the Medes and the Kishans against them, ordering them to take the men alive and bring them into his presence. Then the Medes advanced and attacked the Hellenes. Many of them fell, and others kept coming up continually. They were not driven back, though they suffered great loss. They made it clear to every man, and not least to the king himself, that human beings are many, but men are few. This combat continued throughout the day. When the Medes were being roughly handled, they withdrew from the battle. The Persians, those whom the king called immortals, and whose commander was Hydarnes, took their place and came to the attack, supposing that they at least would easily overcome the enemy. But when these two engaged in combat with the Hellenes, they had no more success than the Median troops, but the same result. They were fighting in a narrow passage, using shorter spears than the Hellenes, and they could not make use of their superior numbers. Meanwhile the Lacedaemonians fought in a memorable fashion. Among the other displays they made, being men perfectly skilled in fighting against men who were unskilled, they would turn their backs to the enemy and pretend to flee. The barbarians, seeing them appear to flee, would follow after them with shouting and clashing of arms. Then, when the Lacedaemonians were being overtaken, they turned and faced the barbarians. By turning around in this way, they killed innumerable multitudes of the Persians, and at these times a few of the Spartans themselves also fell. So, since the Persians could gain no success by trying the entrance and attacking it by divisions, and in every way, they withdrew back.
And there we will pause, on the eve of the battle, with Xerxes still unable to believe that a few thousand men mean to bar his road, and Leonidas and his 300 Spartans waiting in the pass. Next time, in the last part of the book, part 42, the Battle of Thermopylae itself, the assaults thrown back, the immortals broken, the secret path betrayed, and the last stand that made 300 men immortal. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.